Hello, good people of YouTube. Mountbatten here. And today we are talking about everyone's favorite Tier 9 Soviet battleship, the Sovietsky Soyuz. Now, this ship is one of the few Soviet, well, I was going to say high tier ships, but ships past Tier 4 that actually kinda existed. Everything else from Tier well, again, from tier 4 and below, the real tier 5 and up, not so much, except for the Soyuz. The Soyuz was a class of battleship that was planned and laid down, and significant progress was made in their construction before being ultimately canceled after the Second World War came to an end. And it's interesting looking into the history of these ships. So, what's going on here at the Soyuz? We'll look at her historical side first, then we'll talk about the Soyuz in game today. So, the Soyuz class battleships were originally supposed to be 15 Soyuz class battleships, named after the various republics in the Soviet Union. In fact, this warranted their nicknames, the Stalin's republics. So, yes, 15 modern, quite large battleships if they had ever been completed. The size of the Soyuz, as you can see in game, she's a big girl. She would have been around the same size as the Yami and the Montana, if the Montanas have ever actually been built, if they had actually been built. So, of course, just randomly saying, hey, we're going to go ahead and build 15 of some of the largest battleships that have ever been made, just like that, to the Soviet Union in the 30s after some changes Stalin had made. Wasn't really going to be an easy time. Now, they were primarily ordered to counter the Bismarck class that Germany had been building with the Bismarck and the Tirpitz. So obviously this grand plan of 15 didn't go very well, and it was reduced down to 6 and then down to 4. And of the 4 ships that were laid down, only 2 got anywhere near completed. Now, there was all sorts of problems with the Soyuz class. Of course, again, you're having to rush these ships into production and trying to force a shipbuilding industry that hadn't really had any experience building ships this large to make ships this large. You're going to have a couple of bumps there. In fact, I think the largest ship that the Soviet shipbuilding industry had built up into this time was what? What's the cruiser that I'm thinking of? Not the Molotov in game. Kirov. The Kirov class cruisers were the largest things that the Soviet shipbuilding industry had built up until this time, which, again, obviously these ships are much larger than the Kirov class. But anyway, so they ran into all sorts of problems trying to get these ships built, even though on paper, if you look at the armor layout of these ships and the thickness, it looks good on paper, but the Soviet industries couldn't actually produce modern armor in that thickness. So anything above 200 millimeters, the Soviet armor industries couldn't produce cemented armor plates, which at that time was the most modern types of armor for naval vessels. So they had to go with just good old-fashioned hardened steel, which was good in like the 1800s, but in the 1900s, not so much. So even though on paper the Soyuz would have some pretty darn thick armor and a decent armor layout, in reality, if they had been built, it would have been much inferior to that of the Yamato and the Montana. So with the hulls being laid down, we had 2 hulls that were almost complete. We had the Sovietsky Soyuz and the Sovetskaya Ukrainia. I think I said that kind of correctly. When they were canceled, the Soyuz herself was, I believe, around 23% completed, and then the Ukraine was around 21% completed, I do believe. The hulls themselves, I think the Soyuz hulls was like, the hull, like just the the hull, not the superstructure, not the deck, not the machinery. The like armor of the hull was, I think, like 70% completed on the Soyuz, and less on the Ukraine. Now, they did actually produce the guns for a test bed platform, at least the 406mm guns, the 16-inch guns that the Soyuz class was supposed to use, and the guns were able to fire a 16-inch projectile weighing 2,443 pounds at 830 meters a second. Pretty darn fast, and that is of course reflected in game as well. But of course, when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union, resources had to be diverted to, of course, well, building a constant flow of tanks and armored vehicle and equipment to deal with the German invasion of Soviet Russia. So a halt was put on building the Soyuz class, except for the Soyuz herself. She was still supposed to have been worked on during the war, but of course, the way the war went, not so much. Then after the war, with, of course, the fate of battleships pretty much being sealed with the action that we saw in the Pacific, they were ultimately canceled. Even though Stalin really wanted to see one ship get completed, in 1948, the Soyuz herself was canceled and then torn up. So the Soyuz in game, the ship, the Soviet biased ship that almost did exist. How is she? Well, it's weird thinking about the Soviet battleships because in my mind they're still relatively new ships. I mean, they're not brand new like I still think of the Italian battleships, but they're still relatively new in my mind, when in reality that they've been out for quite some time. So the Soviet line in general is supposed to be a line of close-in brawlers, especially from a nose-in angled position. That's where these Soviet battleships are best played. They even have a gimmick with their main battery guns where they have better dispersion the closer you are to the target. It's most noticeable from about 15 kilometers in and 15 kilometers out. At 15 kilometers out, good luck hitting your target. And with the Soyuz, once you get past 16, 17, I wish you the best of luck at hitting any significant amount of shells on target. But once you push in and get within like 13 kilometers, these guns will pretty much consistently hit unless you get really screwed over by RNGesus. Now, the Soyuz herself, being at Tier 9, armed with 9 16-inch guns, 16-inch guns at Tier 9 aren't exactly small, but they're not exactly large, especially with all the crazy stuff we've been getting today. And they do get the good old Soviet AP, and they do fire quite fast with that velocity that we talked about earlier in the historical section of the Soyuz. So these 4.6mm guns, they are pretty darn potent thanks to their velocity and again the Soviet AP. You're going to be chunking battleships pretty hard. They show you their broadside. You'll be citadeling well-armored cruisers. If you catch a cruiser that's turning, even if it's a lightly armored cruiser, you'll probably be ripping most of their HP from them. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's go through her stats in order and talk about how she performs today in game. So her armor layout, she doesn't have a complete wraparound icebreaker bow. She has a 32mm bow. She does get some nice cheek plates that are 220mm. Then you get some really thick armor on her cheek by her number 1 and 2 barbettes. You get a 420mm set of plates here, that all these plates you see in dark red are 420mm thick. Then her main belt's 390mm thick. Then when you get to her flat broadside, 375. And then you come back around, you do get some nice cheek plates on the stern as well. They're 375mm thick. And then her stern armor is 32. Stern and bow decks are 32. Mid deck is 60mm. And then once you remove all that and check out her citadel is, well, pretty darn exposed, and the citadel wall is only 20mm thick. And there's no type of turtleback armor there. You do get a 375mm that's oddly enough torpedo protection plate in front of the citadel, and there's a little bit of a spaced armored effect going on there. It's weird, mostly when you see that torpedo protection crop up over the citadel, like we talked about in yesterday's video, talking about the North Carolina. It's mostly just there as maybe another extra 30 or 20, whatever, normal hull plating that the ship has in addition to the belt armor. But in this case, it pretty much is the belt armor. Now, the Soyuz shares this common weakness with all the Soviet battleships. The Soviet battleships are incredibly tough to kill when they're nose in and angled. You can sit there and just pelt them all day with AP. You're going to bounce most of that. You might be able to get a couple of good hits in on their superstructure. You could try to farm them down with a HE, but like we saw, Soyuz has a 60mm deck. And on top of that, too, they also get the fast damage con. And if they're running Kustazov, they get a free damage con and a heal once their health gets down to 10%. So it is a really tough ship in game, despite oddly enough it wouldn't be, thanks to the type of armor being used on it in real life. But yes, if you get to their flat broadside, you are going to just absolutely obliterate them if you have any large caliber guns, or if you have like something like the Des Moines 8-inch super heavy AP shells from close range. That'll also do it in there too. So yeah, don't show your flat broadside. Angled is great. You will bounce everything if you're angled, but don't let anything get on your flat broadside because you will cease to exist. Speaking of survivability, she does have 88,100 hit points when you have the upgraded B hull, and she has 35% torpedo damage reduction, which is pretty decent. Alright, going back to her gun, where I got a little bit ahead of myself earlier. They have a 29-second reload time with the reload module, which I am running. I'll throw my build back up here again. And a 28-second 180 time, which is really nice. These Soviet battleships, starting from higher tier, do have a really nice 180 time on their turrets, which is great when you're stuck in close range in a bow and fighting position. You want to be able to have the fastest turrets you can. That way, when you're having a brawl, you're not waiting for your turrets to get into place. They're in place, you're ready to fire, you're ready to go. That saved me quite a few times by mounting that grease the gear skill on my commander when it comes down to brawling. Alright, the HE does a maximum damage of 5,800. You have a 40% chance of causing a fire on the target, and you can pin 68mm of armor, and the HE does come out the tubes at 830 meters a second. Forgot to talk about the dispersion range. The dispersion on these guns is 245 meters at 19.4 kilometers, and you cannot extend that any way, shape, or form. With the Soyuz, you don't get a choice for a spotter, you just get a fighter, and you cannot fit the range module on the Soviet battleships. So yes, truly a close-in battleship. AP does a maximum damage of 13,250 and comes out the tubes at 830 meters a second. So I won't spend too much time talking about the guns since I kind of did already, but yes, very sweet AP on these ships. Not only the Soyuz, but the Vladivostok, the Kremlin, the Sinop, all the way down. Great AP. You catch someone's broadside, it's going to bite. It's going to bite hard. I would only really ever load HE. Well, with the Soyuz, you probably will have to, more so than with the other ships because of the 16-inch guns. Only if you are stuck in a bow-in position with another battleship and they're going bow-in, or there's just EDs left on the team. Other than that, the AP will do you plenty good. With lighter cruisers, just wait until they're angled, shoot at their angled sides. I promise you, with the velocity and bite that these AP shells have, they're going to bite, and they're going to bite hard. As I'm sure you've probably seen in this match already with a Colbert. Alright, airstrike. She does get two attacking flights that reload in 25 seconds, and they have a range of 10 kilometers. For her AA, in real life, she was supposed to have a pretty good AA in game. It's kind of, The Kremlin has good AA, but she barely has any health on her AA amounts. The Soyuz, I wouldn't call her an AA built by any stretch of the imagination. She has decent enough AA to where if you have like another ship with you that has decent AA, you'll be kind of shooting down planes, but by yourself, nope. Maneuverability, maximum speed with the speed flags, 29.4 knots. Pretty slow battleship for a tier 9 BB, but enough to keep up. You have a turning circle radius of 950 meters and a rudder shift time of 14.9 seconds. So like other Soviet ships, and again, keep in mind this ship is again around the same size of a Monty and Yami. So yeah, she's not exactly a speed demon. She does have a fairly large turning circle radius of almost 1,000 meters, as do all the Soviet large ships. Concealment, though, pretty good here, 13.1 kilometers with the commander skill and the module equipped. For her consumables, she gets fighter, 3 charges of a heal base, 4 with the Battleship Superintendent that regens 528 hit points per second, is active for 30.8 seconds, reloads to 76 seconds. You have the Soviet Battleship Fast Damage Con here, like I mentioned earlier. It cools down in 38 seconds and is active for 11 seconds. And with the Battleship Commander skill, you can get 4 charges of those. So they took away a charge of her heal because the ship is incredibly tanky. And again, if you're running Kuznetsov on here like I am, you get a free heal anyway if you get below 10% health. So, is this ship a close-in geared battleship still good in today's World of Warships? Yes, although you will have many matches like what you're seeing in the background right now, at least for the first half. The second half is a little bit different. We managed to pull it back here in the second half, thank God. But there's a lot of matches now where, for most of the game, you're waiting for someone to get in range. You're waiting for the enemy team to finally push in a little bit. And with the first half of this match, we were sitting pretty much just a couple of kilometers out of our spawn, waiting for something to happen, and the enemy team didn't really want to get in too close, and eventually we were forced to push in, and the game did last long enough to where it was able to play out. But so many times, games like this would have ended at the 10-minute mark, the 11-minute mark, if one or two things had gone a little bit differently here in this game. So this is a fortunate game where we were able to see this game play out in full, and the Soyuz was able to hang in there and do great things. Now, granted, with the AP at range, 19.6 kilometers, at maximum range, since it is Soviet AP, it does still hit pretty hard, and when it does connect, it does pretty decent damage. In fact, her sister ship, the Rosaya, is in game and has the normal battleship dispersion formula in it. Doesn't have the gimmick where the closer you are, the better your dispersion is. And sure enough, at range, that ship can land shots a bit better than this ship, and it does hurt. But again, the issue is, how many games are like this where you can actually get in close and do some damage. With the Kremlin, you still have the 18-inch guns. That way you can overmatch quite a bit more than 16-inch guns at tier 9. So that kind of makes up for it there. But when you get in close, when you're able to use your AP, when you're able to get in a position to where you can tank and bounce shells, there's nothing harder to kill in this game than an angled large Soviet ship. And this is a large Soviet ship. And sure enough, when she gets in a spot and angled into the enemy team with her bow pointed in, or even in this case with her stern armor, with her stern angled properly, it's quite a fearsome ship to deal with. And again, the AP is very, very, very good. I know I've said like 3 or 4 times, but it can't really be overstated how good the Soviet AP is. So, yes, this is a ship that, in my mind, is still one of the best tier 9 tech line ships in the game. And 2, she's also incredibly resilient against HE with that fast damage con. Now, with submarines, this is where things get a little iffy with the Soviets. I don't know if they were really thinking about the Soviets when they added in the whole ping thing with submarines. You have to, of course, use your damage con to clear pings. So if you get pinged twice in a Soviet battleship, and you don't want to, eat 30k damage from a submarine, you have to use one of your damage cons, and now you're down to just, 4 now. And yeah, that does suck quite a bit more than on other lines. Like other lines, you use your damage con, and if you can either get behind an island or manage to just withdraw fast enough, the submarine might forget about you, or they might ping you again. If you manage to stay alive, you have your damage con back for either the flight that the torpedoes are going to cause, or it's going to come back just in time to clear the ping again. But unfortunately, the Soyuz, you don't have that luxury, nor on the rest of these Soviet battleships. So it's kind of like, okay, do I want to eat the torpedoes, or do I want to use one of my damage cons? And then, once you're out of the damage cons in the Soviet battleships, you're out. There's no getting them back. So that is one part that is frustrating today. It does make them a little bit weaker against submarines than the other classes. But again, in most games, when the submarine is harassing somebody else, you won't have to worry about that. But again, with submarines becoming ever more and more and more popular and, more standard in this game with the direction Wargaming is trying to go with them, of course, you can't assure that for the future. But that's the only real part of today's World of Warships that has hampered the Soviet battleships the Soyuz right here in particular. But again, there's some of the tankiest ships in the game. They're still really good for that. A good Soyuz or a good Soviet battleship and a good bow-in angled position is incredibly hard to deal with and can easily tank for days. If you have a mission where you have to get potential damage, just take the Soyuz out or take a Soviet battleship out, find an island, hug it, go bow-in. You'll have easy 3 million potential damage by the end of the game. But anyway, guys, let me know what you guys think about the Soyuz in the comments down below. Hope you're having a wonderful Thursday. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. We're on our way to 40,000 subs, and I cannot thank you guys enough for that. Hope you're all having a wonderful Thursday. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Hope to catch you guys in the next one.